Life Unrehearsed, brought to you by Flora Lee Senior Residences. Always there for you. Safe, reassuring, and comforting. We call it home.
And welcome back to Life Unrehearsed for all those air travelers. My name is Matt Delvecchio, specializing in life transitions, downsizing, and the senior living industry.
And I'm Corrie Matt, a clinical social worker and author of Someone Died, Now What? Matt, I cannot hear the date September 11th and not conjure up an image. What about you?
Yeah, same thing. And today, obviously, the 20-year anniversary. We've seen a lot of clips. The CJAD did an excellent piece on it with John Moore this afternoon. And it's obviously as tragic as it is. It was an event that permanently changed the world. And sometimes there are tragic events, and life eventually goes back to normal. You hear about mass shootings and these poor kids in schools and so on, but the guns and they're in the States, they're still staying the same. But this obviously was a permanent change, particularly as it related to air travel. And it's kind of ironic why we had this subject today, isn't it?
So that's what I'm going to say. Here's the thing, though. We are not talking about air travel in that capacity at all in any way, shape, or form. In fact, there's a whole new discussion that you and I both agreed that we needed to have about just navigating COVID and air travel. And so no one better than a very dear friend of mine is on the line so that we can talk about the challenge of how do we cope with this fourth wave? How do we travel by air? How do we even go to the airport? Thank goodness I have a very good friend who is an airline person for Air Canada. Juan Carlos Devila is on the line with us to help us out here. Welcome to Life Unrehearsed, Juan.
Thank you very much, Matt and Corey. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's get right into it. How different is travel since COVID began?
Interestingly enough, there's a lot of preparation that was not there in the past that's somewhat required, and I think is duly necessary because we have significantly more restrictions when it comes to the requirements of different jurisdictions, countries, or general destination locations where we're aiming to go to. And sometimes it's even a provincial regulation that might be different from the one that we live in. So it is certainly important to be well prepared, to educate ourselves prior to selecting our destinations, and when we have done so, to ensure that we read all the documentation that comes in the form of the documents that are provided by the airlines and hotels that we'll be utilizing, as well as the general travel information available online for particular countries or jurisdictions that are significantly widely available and known in many cases, but also they are updated regularly. And so it's a good idea to do that kind of a prep work before beginning the journey.
Now, Juan, we're going to talk a lot more about consumers and traveling and air travel, but specifically you're with Air Canada and specifically for the airline industry in general. Obviously, it has been affected. Volumes have gone down significantly. They're starting to creep up. A lot of bankruptcies in the industry as well. Can you give us an idea of the scope of changes that the industry has had to do in the age of COVID?
So the major impact that we saw at the onset of the COVID spread and was, in fact, of course, layoffs and the reduction in frequency of flights. So we saw many people, unfortunately, temporarily be laid off, and as well as the number of personnel available at airports and the different supporting offices and in the aircrafts in general, where there is significantly less flights available. However, the members that remained were incredibly focused on safety, and of course, were dealing with the changes that were required in reassuring passengers and ensuring that the environment was as safe and clearly understood, and that the conditions were clearly understood and communicated to those passengers, taking precautionary measures such as using protective equipment, masks, shields, gloves, and every possible, measure prior to passengers actually boarding or arriving at gates to ensure their well-being, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So that's Juan Carlos Devila. He's a purser for Air Canada, and he's helping us understand the changing travel industry, flying especially during during COVID, but now even the fourth wave. So let's talk about the people. You and I have had discussions about, in general, there are many people that are anxious when they travel, when they fly, in particular. Have you seen an increase in travelers' anxiety about flying or sitting next to somebody, something like
So
that?
certainly, we've seen significant increase in the awareness, and people are quite vividly kind of demonstrating their fear as they board aircraft. They show that sense of kind of reservation, and we do everything that we can from the first point of contact with them to reassure them, to remind them that we're there to for their safety first and foremost, that the aircrafts are in the best shape that they've been in in decades, and that we simply are taking every possible measure to ensure that the environment, while they are on board an aircraft or in airports or in those public areas, is as well maintained and as clean as can possibly be expected. But there has been significantly more contact with those passengers. And at first the numbers were fewer, and we're seeing a massive increase in travel, and fortunately enough, people are starting to kind of overcome those inhibitions and those fears, and realizing that there isn't very many places in the world and where there is safer conditions, and where we have proven time and time again with all the studies that there has been no transmission or minimal transmission. So it's been an environment where you truly can feel safe. And all the measures are taken apart from the standard safety measures to ensure that every individual arrives at the destination in the same condition as they arrived, prior to it, or they were prior to it.
It's Juan Carlos Devila, purser at Air Canada. Now, Juan, I've only taken one flight since the pandemic. It was a quick one to Toronto. I got to see Mom last month. I was talking to a buddy who just came back from Europe, 8.5 hours with a mask with his family. He had family in Spain, in fact, and much more different experience. So for those that have not hopped on a plane and maybe working up their confidence to get back, or they're planning to get on a flight, can you bring us through, and I guess, let's start within Canada for now, just to keep this simple. What can someone expect from the time they arrive at the airport all the way to boarding?
So when they arrive at an airport, first of all, there's going to be a major change with regards to who's having access to the airport itself. Only the traveling person will be allowed inside the airport in most jurisdictions, simply to avoid the masses and the traffic inside the airport, and to maintain as clean and as orderly an environment as possible. So once a person arrives at the airport, if they're for any reason dropped off by a family member, they would have to say goodbye prior to entering the terminal building. There's, of course, exceptions to those individuals who may require additional assistance, such as the elderly or somebody that's maybe accompanying a young person traveling unattended. Then they would, of course, have to show the proper identification, and they would be allowed temporary access to that facility. Afterwards, there is a little bit more time with the registration process, check-in, and so on, because you do have to, in many cases, demonstrate that you are carrying the appropriate documentation, whether it's a result from a PCR test or anything that might be required by the destination. In Canada, in general, you can skip that particular step, but there certainly are some questions regarding the health and the condition of the traveler that are actually asked, and of course, so you should expect to take a few extra minutes. But the lineups overall have been minimal at airports when it comes to the check-in and registration process, because there's less masses, as I said, and because we're seeing the numbers increase at a rate where it's been managed quite well, and there's been appropriate staffing for those requirements. So just a few more minutes. Security seems to be the same process that it has been in the past, and then afterwards the boarding process is the same, usually by roll numbers and priority boarding, of course, and people with special assistance or needs. And then when they enter the aircraft, of course, they're seeing, we're encouraging and trying to maintain the social distancing aspect of, slowing down and trickling the boarding process to make it orderly and spaced. And then when they enter the aircraft, they notice that the aircrafts are just pristine. the conditions of travel are just the best that they have been. It's reassuring for absolutely everybody to see that the kind of care and commitment to the cleanliness of the aircraft is of utmost importance, along with the rest of the safety procedures that are in place.
So this is very helpful, I think, to people that are anticipating taking that leap of faith. And we have to go out to a traffic update. But when we come back, Juan Carlos Devila from Purser Air Canada, he's going to tell us what the simplest thing a traveler can do before setting off to their destination.
Life Unrehearsed, brought to you by Lianas Senior Transition Support, specialists in downsizing and seniors' residences.
You're listening to Life Unrehearsed. I'm Corrie Sirota along with Matt Delvecchio, and we are talking to Juan Carlos Devila. He's a purser for Air Canada, and he's helping us figure out how we travel safely during a pandemic or right now the fourth wave. So this summer I had the opportunity to head out to Hawaii, and that was a very long flight, and it involved a lot of processes and procedures, and some of which included specific tests from specific places with specific letterheads, et cetera, all to say that, Juan, what is the simplest thing travelers can do before setting off to their destinations?
Well, travelers should research the latest travel regulations pertinent to their particular destination. And we suggest doing it at least 1 week prior to departure, if not earlier. This is to avoid last-minute surprises, to be prepared to book or organize testing or necessary documentation if required, in order to avoid being denied travel, because the last thing we want is to be sent back or be denied entry into a particular destination. However, as we mentioned earlier, there's so many resources available, whether it's contacting the airlines themselves or travel agents, as well as checking online. All those details are available with very rare exceptions. In your case, it was a bit of a juggle because you had a very particular destination where they required very specific clinics, and it was a lot of fun talking to you about the kind of roller coaster that you had to go through. But I have to reassure the traveling public that most destinations are not so complicated. And the standard things that we've discussed and we've seen in the media with regards to testing and with regards to having proper documentation apply in most cases. And to just, also ensure that they show up with the right attitude. That attitude is that we are there for the passenger safety, that we are maintaining the cleanest environment that could be possibly expected. In many cases, when we use HEPA filters in our aircrafts and the kind of cleansing products that we know with electrostatic sprayers that are being used prior to every single flight, we want them to show up with the attitude that we're ready to get our experiences back, to have fun, to travel, to see our family and friends. Just like Matt had the luxury of, we can call it that nowadays, of seeing mom in Toronto, and we want people to just feel refreshed and be happy that after this, this very stressful period, that they can have the opportunity to get away and just get back to on track with their life.
Yeah, absolutely. Juan Carlos Devila, purser at Air Canada. And just to clarify for Corrie, who did go to Hawaii, great destination. You were actually there for work and not leaving the country in the middle of a pandemic. Yeah. But not a bad gig there, Corrie. Now, Juan, you mentioned it briefly, HEPA filters. Ventilation is obviously you see the schools now, all the schools are trying to improve ventilation, try to get airflow, everyone outdoors. Well, a lot of people are worried about going into an airplane because of air quality. And I know the industry is doing a superb effort in trying to improve air quality and ventilation. You mentioned HEPA filters. What else is being done by a lot of the airlines?
So before an aircraft departs, there is obviously a procedure in place today where every single space that's available inside cavity, overhead bins, units in galleys, lavatories. Everything is opened and everything is cleaned to perfection. Electrostatic sprayers basically spread evenly these disinfectant products that are approved, by the health agencies throughout the countries, and they're mandated by IATA, which is the International Air Transport Association. But every airline uses the products that are permitted within their jurisdiction, and that are very useful to it because they adhere to all the surfaces on board aircraft, and they ensure that every nook and cranny has been disinfected prior to passenger boarding. And so on top of that, there are other measures that we use. In our particular case, we provide 3-ply masks as well as disinfecting products to every single passenger on every single flight segment. And so on top of the fact that everything is seamlessly treated and dealt with to ensure that there is no bacterial remnants on the surfaces, there's additional products available for the passengers. On with regards to the crew members as well as other staff, every single protective equipment is used at all times when there's contact with passengers. And of course, we encourage them to maintain the safety standards that we apply ourselves, which include constantly using their masks, including when they enter lavatories, when they're maybe walking throughout the cabin if need be, as well as whenever they're not consuming products, that we mean actively consuming products, such as maybe taking a sip of water and then replacing the mask. And then, if you take those kinds of measures, you're certainly going to see that the average individual will have minimal risk of any exposure, as we have noticed in the past. Like we mentioned, that transmission has been absolutely minimal. It really has been a very safe environment to be in. With regards to the HEPA filters themselves, they're very, very effective at maintaining the circulation within a range. On average, is about 3. It depends on the aircraft manufacturer and on the ventilation system as well. But on average, within the 3-row range, the air circulates sideways. It's almost like a circular motion within that 3-row range, and therefore there is no transmission of any air circulating back or forth, forward or back on the aircraft, which really truly provides an exceptional way to circulate that air back into these filters that collect the tiniest of particles.
Right. So I look, we could probably sit here for a lot longer, but time is limited. I know you have to take off on a flight. I just want to thank you so much for demystifying the process for so many people, because I think hearing it, and I hope that was the goal for all of us, is hearing what is being done and how to keep people safe. It's happening, and that's why we can be back to traveling. But if people wanted to have more information about travel restrictions, guidelines, where, again, you mentioned something, where should they go?
So first of all, the airlines provide significant details regarding the standard procedures that should be taken and the steps prior to departure. And when you book a flight, of course, there's a package and information that's provided to you. It's emailed once the booking is done. However, the CDC, as well as the health, Canadian, health authorities or provincial health authorities have websites with additional details, as well as those destinations, as previously mentioned. And of course, doing your individual homework online is very, very useful.
Our own Google
searches.
And
if you have any additional questions, of course, we are there as trained staff and informed staff. We're there to provide any additional instructions or details and to reassure the passengers. Of course, one of the most evident of all clear indications of the safety standards that we maintain is our own health and well-being on board. When you come on board an aircraft and you see how happy we are to greet you, and we're also very
right.
in most cases, my colleagues have been minimally affected, if at all, and I personally haven't had any cases of any colleagues being sick because of the strict and standards that we adhere to and we've implemented to ensure that. And safety is the utmost priority.
And for those that have traveled, you really are. And I know you have to rush out to a flight, Juan Carlos. Thank you very much for being with us.
The pleasure was all mine.
All right, Corrie, what do we have next week?
It's Arthritis Awareness Month. We're talking with Trish Barbato, yes, who says, if we're going to extinguish the fire of arthritis, first we need everyone to understand just how serious arthritis really is. And we're also going to meet the creator of an app that uses artificial intelligence to help university students organize their schedules, including when assignments are due.
Yeah, incredible app. Thanks for listening and tuning in to Life Unrehearsed. And a big thank you to our technical producer, Jimmy G. You can listen to Life Unrehearsed here on CJAD 800 every Saturday at 3 p.m.